the sales rep or the company may turn around and go, no, they're great. It's like, yeah, but they're not audited. So that's like me saying I'm the world's greatest, racing driver and lover. It doesn't really mean anything because I said it. You have to have it third-partied. So I think that, as an example, look for a company with good quality financials. Look for a company that looks after its people and its suppliers, and look for a company that's got a good quality environmental story as well.
Hi, and welcome back to the Teams Insider podcast. Really fun conversation this week with Simon Dudley. Simon has previously worked at Polycom, at Lifesize, at Logitech, a whole career in our space, and he's now working as an independent consultant. And we had a really interesting conversation about his views on the industry, what's going on with all the bar vendors coming into the space, how a customer would choose the right partner for them in terms of devices. And now he's independent, he really doesn't mind sharing his opinions on everything that's going on in our space. So many thanks to Simon for jumping on the podcast, a really enjoyable conversation. Also, many thanks to Pure IP, who are the sponsor of this podcast. Really appreciate all their support. On with the show. Hi everybody, welcome back to the Teams Insider podcast. Excited to have Simon on the podcast. First time on the pod. We've talked over the years a number of different things behind the scenes, but this is the first time on the record, Simon. So first off, do you want to just give us an intro, a little bit of background, and you've changed what you're doing recently as well, so maybe you can give us the history, because you've got quite a strong history in our space.
I do. Well, firstly, Tom, thanks for having me on the show. Big fan. Hello, audience. Pleased to be here. So, Simon Dudley. Well, I've been in the video conferencing space since Noah was a boy. 1992, I sold my first Picturetel Concorde. And so almost everything I know is no longer true, at least from a technical point of view in the video conferencing space. I used to sell Picturetel, then I worked for Polycom for many years. Then I was part of the team that built the first high-def systems for Lifesize. So we changed that market, although ultimately Lifesize didn't quite take as much advantage.
I deployed a couple of Lifesize systems in my time when I was at a Cisco partner, actually. It was an alternate there.
They were a great product, probably a little early, whatever. They can have a whole other debate about what worked and didn't in that organisation. I got somewhat disillusioned with the market back in 2015, started my own consultancy, wrote some books, which are still available on Amazon. And then a certain guy by the name of Scott Walton called me, said, would you like to do some consultancy for us at Logitech? He showed me what they were up to, which was Brio and then Meetup. And I said, ooh, the market's going to change. And I did Logitech for nearly 9 years, man and boy, and it was great. And we had an excellent time. Yeah,
what a tear in terms of how Logitech came into and became a huge player in that market as well, from kind of keyboard and mice to webcam to USB systems to full room systems. It was an incredible journey.
It really was. I mean, when I joined, one of the cameras behind me, actually just out of focus, was a product that's code name was Colossus, because it cost $1,000 for a PTZ or PTZ camera with a speakerphone attached. And it was a great product, but Logitech couldn't get its head around the idea that we had a $1,000 product to sell. Hence the reason it was called Colossus. Now, they're making $7,000, $8,000, $10,000 solutions. So Logitech really came in and realized that in a market where all the products are beginning to look the same, then having a high quality, low price, highly available product on a global basis really was a winning strategy. And I did that, ran sales enablement, competitive intelligence, market analysis, sales enablement for them for many years. And then I decided earlier in the summer that, it's time for a new adventure. So I've gone off and started doing this for myself now, because I've realized that most companies only compete, they use what I call half-court tennis. They only think about themselves. They never really consider their competitor, and they sell on speeds and feeds. And we're living in a world now where increasingly all the products look very, very similar, with a few exceptions, but most of them are pretty similar. So if they look similar, how are you going to sell on anything other than price? Well, there's plenty of things to sell on, but most companies aren't working out how to do that. And my consultancy is to help companies do that. Be a more effective competitor in a world where all the products are beginning to look pretty similar.
That's awesome. And now you're not any one particular vendor. We can have a bit more of a no-holds-barred conversation on the pod, which should be fun.
Yeah, because I'm famous for being the corporate guy who only ever toes the corporate line. But yeah, you're right. The shackles are really off now. I'm almost nervous for my own liberty.
Sorry, we're all friends here, Simon.
Sure. If I go, oh no, I shouldn't have said that, we can maybe edit it out.
Yeah.
Maybe.
So let's talk about that, because we've had this conversation before offline, but like particularly in the Teams market, the kind of bar market, I guess broadly, and now bar and BYOD kind of all merging together. It feels like there's a running joke in our space that everybody's got a bar. Increasingly, many OEMs are certified for Teams. So I mean, what's your perspective of that? Why is everybody going in and doing a bar, getting Teams certified? Can the market sustain that? What's your thinking there?
Well, I mean, there's a couple of things, right? So technology goes through basically 4 levels, right? It starts at effectively science experiment, right? So Video Collab 30 years ago when I was first involved in it was probably close to science experiment. Then the technology moves from the user has to work around the technology. A good example of that would be knowing how ISDN connections worked, or what an ISDN line even was, and bandwidths and algorithms and all those sorts of things that we used to talk about in the video space. If you want a different analogy, something like WordPerfect would be users work around the technology. Right, 30 years ago, if you use WordPerfect as an example, you needed to understand how control codes work. And then the market changed. The WebExes, it wasn't Teams then, but what became Teams, Zoom, those sorts of products, they then started moving around the user. So I don't know about you, Tom, but I haven't spoken to a client about a video algorithm or bandwidths used or any of that stuff for probably thick end of 10 years. And that's because the cloud solutions made the technology move around the users. And then what happens is in a technology that it effectively dissolves into a larger thing, right? Microsoft's patently doing this with Teams. Video is no longer a standalone app. It's built into everyone's workflow. And that's true for what everyone else is doing as well. So when it comes to things like video bars, what Microsoft has done is, quite rightly, if you want to mass deploy this technology, they've made it as simple as possible. They've made it as ubiquitous as possible, and the best way for Microsoft to do that is to have everyone and his brother go and make a video bar, and it pushes the prices down. And of course, from Microsoft's point of view, that's an excellent answer. From all the vendors' point of view, it looks like an opportunity, which it can be, but it also can look like we'll get into this market because the barrier to entry now is minimal. It's really very easy to make video collab. I was joking with someone at the weekend. I think my mum now makes video conferencing bars because literally anyone could go to Qualcomm and have one built for them.
Well, for those not so familiar with the devices space as well, I don't think they understand that there are other companies behind the scenes where you can just turn up and say, put us together a bar, put our logo on it, and off we go. And there's some providers in our space that genuinely engineer their own stuff, and there's a whole bunch that essentially, all the respect, maybe you could explain it better how you do that, say if you were coming into the space.
Sure. So 10 years ago, 7-8 years ago, when the bar market started kicking off, then it was pretty complicated and hard to build your own solutions. You needed to have your own version of Android. You needed to understand how to use these effectively mobile phone type chips sets that people the Qualcomm make for the vast majority of the market. And you need to have a lot of serious engineering. In the last few years, a lot of people can go to people like Qualcomm being the obvious example, and they will give you a bar, and then you can adjust it as much as you want. If you want better audio, you can go and do that. If you want better cameras, you could go and do that. If you just want to take the standard off-the-shelf device, put your company logo on it and say we'll sell millions, then you could go and do that. So I think part of the issue is that a lot of companies have got involved in the market because why wouldn't you, right? You know, you're seeing it as a multi-billion-dollar opportunity. Everyone's got one. We'll just take 5% market share and we're off. But in a world where all the products are looking the same, then you've got yourself a problem. How do you differentiate yourself? The analogy I use, because I'm a big fan of analogies, some of which work, some of which don't, is the PC industry, right? So I turn around to people every day on video calls and say, what kind of PC are you running? Now, if they're a Mac user, they simply say, oh, I use a Mac. If they're running a Windows platform, they'll go, it's a Dell or an HP or a Lenovo, right? It's one of those three. Almost never do you find anything else. And why is that? Well, because 35 years ago, when Windows started coming out, about 92, so 33 years ago, there were dozens, hundreds perhaps, of PC manufacturers, and they're all different. Everyone from Amstrad to Tulip to IBM to Compaq to DEC to Olivetti. I mean, the list just went on and on and on. And then it concatenated down to three. Now, it wasn't because those products were better, or the product wasn't better, but the buying experience for the clients was better, whether that's global availability or a broad range of products, or maybe a better ESG story, or from a vendor that you already had a relationship with. And I feel that we're at that point in the video conferencing space, a much smaller market, by the way, than the PC industry ever was. But there's now 28 companies who make Microsoft Teams certified video conferencing bars.
Yeah, we do.
So
we track all that on the site. So if people want to get into the weeds, there's some research reports there of who's got what. But yeah, the number of OEMs over the last 2 or 3 years has blown up. And like you say, there's a lot of onesie twosie brands are like, oh, just come out of nowhere with a bar or with a couple of certified devices.
Sure, and I don't want to suggest that these products aren't perfectly adequate. They're perfectly reasonable. I'm sure. I don't know of any bar out there that is not fit for purpose. But that's sort of the point. If you just launch a bar and go, well, I'll grab 5% market share because, you know, I will. I got a bit of less of it. No, you won't. Because if there's nothing to differentiate you, it's like buying an Olivetti PC, right? No one buys an Olivetti PC anymore because the success criteria have changed, and now the three big players in the PC industry all look pretty similar to each other, at least as an outsider. And I think that the video conferencing space is going to have to do some special things. You're either going to have to reinvent your technology, your product, enormously. I find that an extremely unlikely scenario because ultimately you're all running Microsoft code on these devices and they all want every machine to look identical. It's in their interest for it to be a completely consistent experience. Or you work out how to sell it in a unique way. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity there for vendors, manufacturers, resellers to actually go out there and go, there is a different way to sell this product. And that's the sort of work that I'm looking to do with people. So if you're sitting there and you're looking at a bar and you think to yourself, well, how do I make this thing different? Talk to me rather than spend 5 years with 200 engineers and come up with something that the market may not even want.
Yeah, well, the PC or laptop comparison is really interesting because Microsoft have kind of said multiple times they want the MTR market to be millions, plural, of devices. And I think I think the last public number is 1 million in play. I know that we're well over that number now privately, but they want multiple millions. And part of that is making things simpler, faster, cheaper, and by definition, more distribution, more commoditized, more I can just buy a whole bunch of them. So if you take the PC market as a model, it does ring true that there's going to be increasing competitive pressure. Let's take the perspective of a customer first and a partner or an OEM second. So if you were advising a customer now, what would you say to them when they're making their technology vendor choice? Like they've got a couple of hundred rooms they want to do, and they like, how do they choose between these 20, nearly 30 options and OEMs?
I think it's an excellent question, and obviously it's somewhat variable depending on the client's requirements. But there's a couple of things to consider. The first one is just because it's more expensive doesn't make it better. Just because something has, I don't know, more microphones, right? I met someone the other day who told me their device had over 20 microphones, and I sat there and went, "Is it any better than the one with 3? Because they're both certified, so probably not." So if I'm an end user...
Surely it's 6 times better. I mean, that's just maths, right?
Sure. Yeah. Well, your next car, Tom, is it going to have 18 wheels on it? I mean, that obviously would be better than the 4
It'll go much faster.
Right. This is not an automotive blog, is it? So I think the first thing I would do if I were a client is work on the principle that every manufacturer is going to have a good enough product, right? There are no terrible products anymore.
And to be fair, Microsoft have performance bars for getting performance levels for getting certified, right? So they do. It's not just a badge. They do put these things in a lab and do audio video testing. So there is some minimum level there to get your badge.
Yes. So the initial thought is, right, well, if they're all the same, I'll just buy the cheapest. But I don't think that's the right answer either, because one of the things to consider is where do they make these things and who makes them? So one of the things that we end up with in all of industry is is the old ESG story. Now, I'm based, as I'm sure you can tell, in northern Colorado, USA, and a lot of my sales team used to say to me, "Oh, my clients don't care about ESG. Maybe some tree huggers in Europe do. But my clients don't care." And I would go, "Yeah, I bet they do." Now, it may not be on the
that's
amount of recycled plastics.
Environmental, social governance, right? For those not...
Sorry, yes, ESG for those who aren't aware. Yeah, environmental, social governance. So environmental, are you using recycled plastics, for example? Now, my old employer, Logitech, is a good example of that, did a brilliant job.
Yeah, really
making highly... Yeah, and badging it all and everything. Not every manufacturer does that. You could turn around and say, well, as a specifier, I care about the quality of the experience. But if the quality of the experience is pretty much identical, then you're going to need to look at other things. And the purchasing department is going to look at things like, are you going to affect negatively or positively my company's ESG report? And almost every decent sized company now has an ESG report. Anyone who's on a stock market will have an ESG report, because funding and people investing in them is predicated on having decent ESG reports. So one of the things, as an example, the G, governance. People don't really think about governance. They think about, are the working conditions of the workers nice? Is it recycled plastics? Yes. But do they have things like good quality audited accounts? Some of the players in this market are, shall we say, based in locations where getting good quality financials is... how do I put this politely, problematic. And many companies in this market are private organisations who've never even announced any of their financial positions. So if I'm a buyer, I have to work on the principle that if you don't have audited financials to show that you're going to be in business in 5 years to support me, I have to assume your financials are terrible. Now, the sales rep or the company may turn around and go, no, they're great. It's like, yeah, but they're not audited. So that's like me saying I'm the world's greatest, racing driver and lover. It doesn't really mean anything because I said it. You have to have it third-partied. So I think that, as an example, look for a company with good quality financials. Look for a company that looks after its people and its suppliers, and look for a company that's got a good quality environmental story as well. But there's plenty more to it than that as well, because you want to make certain that as a customer, you have a solution that fits as many niches as possible. One of my old employers, who will remain nameless, put out a thing a couple of years ago saying that they wanted to reduce the number of suppliers to the organisation, vendors, different manufacturers, by 1,000 in 1 year. They wanted to reduce that number of companies they work with by 1,000. And at the end of the year, they admitted it actually increased by 700. And why was that? Because, if you buy pens and this is a Bic pen, and I don't know, Bic only makes this kind of pen, Well, now I need another supplier that costs me money and another account I need to look after. Well, this is a blue pen, and maybe this company only makes blue pens, so I need a supplier of red pens or green pens.
I think we've all felt that, probably customer side and vendor side, that onboarding overhead and managing another supplier.
Pain in the neck. So what you want is a vendor who can supply a broad range of solutions. Because another angle is, for example, management, right? If you've got an environment where you've got large rooms are made by one manufacturer, mid-sized rooms are made by another one, and then your low-end rooms are made by a third, and then you go, right, I need to manage it. Wow, that's great. I guess you could use Teams. But Teams is really about just looking after the software within the device. It's not great, and certainly not as good as the manufacturer's own manufacturer.
It's currently nearly always a better together story, isn't it? Like ProPortal does your core stuff, and then you've got camera settings or device settings that with the OEM tooling.
Yeah, I mean, just things like software updates. It's a pretty obvious example. And in the old days, when you had like a dozen of them around the world, then software updates probably not a bigger deal. If you've got thousands of them, where many customers do today, software updates are a disaster. So if you've got 3 vendors at 3 different sizes of your organization, that's going to be a bit of a problem from a support, from a management, from a getting a decent pricing perspective. So I came up with this idea. I wrote a book about this recently. And one of the ideas is that there's basically 12 vectors that every vendor should look at. Equally, those same angles should be things that end users are looking at as well. So you should be looking at the portfolio of products, not individual products. You should be looking at ESG. You should be looking at who they've got alliances with. So if, for example, you as a customer, right, you're all Teams, Microsoft to the end of time, and then Microsoft quadruples the price of everything, and you go, oof, actually, maybe I'm going to, if I'm allowed to say it on this podcast, maybe I'm going to make the decision to go Google.
That's it, instant cut off, I'm afraid. But there's other vendors out there.
What's that meteorite coming to hit me on the head?
I've seen that play into people's decision-making process as well. Like and usually it's like supporting multiple platforms and or BYOD as well comes up. Like we're not intending to switch, but it's nice to know we've got a plan B with the hardware if we needed it.
Yeah, and most CIOs have whether they're in a position to follow it or not, but most of them have an edict that says do not get yourself painted into a corner by a vendor. If they can put you in a position where you are stuck with them and you have no option but to stick with them, it's not a great position for any CIO or IT manager to be in. So avoid it if you can. Make certain that you have hardware that can work with multiple platforms. I'll give you an example. Cisco's an interesting example. Cisco runs on a very different chipset than everyone else. So everyone else is running these Qualcomm, basically high-end mobile phone chips. For one, it's not quite the same, but it's pretty similar. Our friends over at Cisco run NVIDIA chips. And you think, well, what difference does it make? Who cares? It's doing a video call. But the NVIDIA chipset has so much more compute in it, you can do things like run WebEx on Zoom and Teams simultaneously in the same device. That gives their customers an awful lot more options than the sort of company that turns around and says, right, we're running a Qualcomm, you can do a factory reset and reboot this into Google or Zoom or some other platform. So, you're paying extra money for a Cisco solution. There's no question you are generally paying more for it. But for those customers who want that ultimate flexibility, the Cisco solution's pretty compelling. Doesn't mean it's right for everybody, but that's a good example of how someone playing a rather different game can have a very different outcome for users.
How can the customer assess that kind of? There's the financial, are you going to be around in 5 years, which is one thing, but there's the, are you still going to be best buddies with Microsoft in 5 years? And I always find that's interesting when I talk to customers, because a lot of them don't think that far ahead with relationships, yet we see OEMs come and go with these partnerships.
They do, and that's actually a rather tough question to answer. I mean, how can you know that? I suppose, as an old hero of mine once said, the best way of telling the future is to look at the past. And the only reason we say that is because there's nowhere else to look, right? I mean, what else are you going to do? So I think the past is a good way of looking at it. So if a company's had a long relationship with Microsoft over, as an example, or Zoom or Google or whoever, other, as they would say in the BBC, other platforms exist. Whatever those relationships are, if they've had a long relationship with them in the past, are they likely to have one in the future? Well, we don't really know, but it's likely that they will. So, if you wanted to take, and by the way, I said 28, I could be wrong, it might be 24, but I suspect by the time we actually go to put this online, it'll probably be 28. So you could probably take out 2/3 of those vendors just by going, well, I don't use their audio systems, for example. If they're an audio manufacturer, make lovely high-end stuff for boardrooms, and you're not a user of that platform, it's hard to see why you'd buy their bar, right? There's not a particularly logical reason to do so. So you could probably exclude them. That would probably get rid of half of those vendors. You could probably then look at, I'm a little nervous of anyone who doesn't have high-quality financial data or an audit of their working conditions. No company wants to find out that one of their vendors is using people in slave conditions. Nike, I'm looking at you as an example. No one really wants to be the guy who finds out that, well, it was $20 cheaper because the working conditions of the folks who work there are pretty awful. Easier simply to solve that problem by dealing those people out of the deal. If you're a really large company, you're probably going to want to work with a really large company, service level agreements, for example. So what you can probably do is narrow down your search before you get to looking at products to 4 or 5 vendors. You probably then almost could throw a dart in a board and say, I'll look at 2. And if I can't tell the difference between the 2, then I'll get more and more granular on the things I decide to pick on, whether it's breadth of solution or maybe breadth of distribution.
Yeah, I like you touched on distribution. That's another one I see get overlooked. It's like, we're going to go with this vendor. I'm like, well, you're in like 70 countries. Can they get units to you efficiently? RMAs, like, what's the model? Like, that gets glossed over a lot as well.
It does. Look, if you're in North America or Western Europe, basically every vendor, with a few of the Chinese as examples, are going to be able to supply really easily to you. But if you've got, I don't know, a mine in Chile, does your vendor even have the ability to sell products in Chile or Guangdong or Philippines or wherever it is? And of course, by definition, video collab is a sort of tool that needs to be used because people don't want to go to Chile for that Wednesday afternoon meeting. It's a long way from anywhere. So, video by its nature, I think IT managers would much rather put all the video systems in one room because it's so much easier to support and manage them if you do that. But it rather makes the technology a bit worthless if you don't actually distribute it to the rest of the world. I think that's where the PC industry taught us something. If you look at Dell and HP and Lenovo, they're all big, they all do an enormous range of products, and they're all globally distributed because that's what most of their clients actually want. You could argue they all look pretty similar, and it doesn't mean there are opportunities. I was thinking about this at the weekend. I'm in the middle of writing an article about the parallels between now and 35 years ago. And one company that hasn't come up in my research, but of course I suddenly remembered, was Panasonic. So Panasonic make laptops. But they make the kind of laptops you could make a house with, as in you could use it as a hammer, because they make the Tough Book or whatever. I think they're called Tough Books. And they're great if you're in the field and using that sort of technology. Nobody else makes one of those. So I suspect Panasonic's probably the highest margin vendor in the laptop business because they don't have to compete with the other guys because they make a device that's basically bulletproof. That may or may not be true.
Yeah, we'll check their marketing for that. But I love this conversation. It's really interesting. And thanks for taking we have a lot of enterprises listening, so the customer perspective is really interesting. For the OEMs and partners listening, I feel like we've probably just scared a few of them. Like what conversation can you have with your kind of framework? How do they begin to think about how they can strengthen their portfolio and their pitch and their conversation?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the first one, let's do vendors. Let's do manufacturers of products first. And then we'll talk about how resellers can fit into this story, and distribution for that matter. So the first thing that most vendors do not understand is, are they the A, B, or C brand of their resellers? So what do I mean by that? So if I'm a big reseller, or any reseller, and I sell a product for a manufacturer, I'll have the people I lead with, the manufacturer I like, I know, I've got good experiences with, the rep turns up on a Thursday with donuts, whatever the story is that makes me have the A brand, I'll have the A brand. Then I'll have the B brand. The client rings me up and says, I'm already talking to some other company about the product that's your A brand, so you don't want to offer that because you need to have something different. And these are the players that you probably don't make as much margin with, or maybe your relationship's not quite as tight, but you still have them as your backup. The client may turn around and say, your A brand's too expensive, or it has a capability or doesn't have a capability that the B brand does. So you go with the B brand. And the C brand, for every reseller I've ever met in my 40 years in this industry, is the one that's on the shelf. Oh, you'd like the Ockenpockel Mark 7? Oh, yeah, sure, we've got it. It's over here. And the reseller probably knows next to nothing about that product, but knows they can get it through distribution. So if I'm a vendor, I want to know, but don't, my resellers, am I the A brand or the B brand or the C brand? Because you know what the reseller's always going to turn around to the vendor and say? You're our friend, you're our A brand. They all say it, but they don't really mean it. And by the way, for the really big resellers, the A, B, and C brand can vary by office, by individual rep, which is pretty terrifying. So if I'm a vendor, how do I fix that? And if I'm a reseller, I probably want to get rather a better handle on what am I doing? Because you're much better off as a reseller working with a few brands than you are working with a dozen brands across half a dozen offices, all of whom buy their own thing. You don't get any economies of scale, both from a financial or from a technical depth perspective.
And how much of our kind of UC video systems market do you think is the customers making a vendor decision and then going to their suppliers and saying, I want ABC vendor, versus the reseller or the AV partner is influencing that choice?
I think that's very variable on who you ask. If you ask the resellers, and of course, just for the record, no one listening to this or watching this does this, but others will be led very much by what the customer says. If the customer picks up the phone and says, I want the Okie Kokie Mark 7 GTI, I can supply it. That's going to be the answer because it's easier. No sales rep is going to go, no, you're wrong. I think you should buy this other product. I'm going to spend 3 months convincing you. If you're already convinced, I'm going to supply it. So I think that's not an unreasonable position. It can be a bit nervy, though, because then you end up with no A, B, or C. You're just sort of blowing in the wind, whatever. I guess every brand then becomes C brand. And then from a client's point of view, I think that a lot of clients don't really understand what they're buying very well. And that's not a criticism of them. It's a reality. You only buy a technology once every 5, 6, maybe 10 years. And by the way, your average life expectancy of a video conferencing room is about 5.5 to 6 years. So you've probably gone through 1 or 2 or maybe even 3 generations of product in that time. So even if you bought product 6 years ago, when you come to replace it 6 years later, the market's changed dramatically. And you're a CIO or an IT manager. Do you really have the time to go and learn this market backwards? I think one of the things that vendors do a bad job of is many, not all, none of the ones watching, all the usual caveats, but others seem to be under the really interesting perspective that their product is the best. Every vendor believes their product is the best without actually defining what best is. And what they truly seem to believe, erroneously in my opinion, very erroneously, is that the sales job is simply to explain why our product is best And once the customer understands why we are best, then they will naturally invest in our technology. Well, that's nonsense. It doesn't make any sense at all, because what it really means is that you need to be highly technical to sell it. You need to be even more technical and clever to buy it. Well, clients don't want to have a PhD in video conferencing to make the right decision. They want to go out there and go, this is a problem, I need to fix this problem. I'm probably not even going to be in most of the video conference calls, but lots of senior types are. They are going to be demanding, and if it all goes horribly wrong, then I'm Johnny on the spot for fixing that problem. So what IT managers actually want is the least hassle possible. In no way is that a criticism. Good. You want systems that just work. So I think that what a lot of resellers and a lot of vendors get confused by is they talk about speeds and feeds and specs. Most of the clients just want a system that works and the phone never rings. I used to do a bit of public speaking on this topic about support. And one of the things that used to get me booed on a fairly regular basis to CIOs was when I would say, CIOs go to work to not get fired. And people didn't like that, but it's a reality in the sense that if you go to work and the phone rings, it's like the fire brigade, right? You know it's trouble. Something's gone wrong.
Nobody rings IT to say, job well done, it's all been quiet today.
No. And when I used to get booed at these events, I would say, oh, really? So how many of you have rung your own department to thank them when everything worked today? And they'd all shuffle in their seat, right? Because no one does. You only ring when there's trouble. And video is very high profile. And I think this idea of having as low a low number of calls come in as possible.
Yeah, and I hear this in my research talking to enterprise customers. Like we talk a lot about what are you looking forward to in the coming year in terms of features or capabilities, and they will all trade the newest AI feature for stability and robustness, and that's a fundamental before you get to anything smart. And like that's really, really still, unfortunately, in our industry, still a challenge in some cases.
I don't know. I'd agree with everything you said, other than unfortunately. Look, my car will do, I don't know, 100 miles an hour. And it's a Nissan Armada, which is like a bungalow with four-wheel drive, right? It's a huge bloody thing. Would I trade 130 mile an hour top speed for half the reliability? No. I would trade, I mean, the thing is, it's a Nissan built in Japan, right? It's the most reliable thing short of Toyota there is. But would I trade even more reliability for 95 miles an hour? Yes. Because I've never done 100 miles. The thing would be terrifying at 100 miles an hour. It's like driving a chateau down the road, right? So I think that a lot of people get all obsessed about the specs, but they don't care or notice the things that really matter. I'll give an example. Cable management. The exciting world of cable management. Some manufacturers, I'll let the users do their own research on this one, but having cables that don't just fall out the underside of the device because they're all just hanging unretained on the underside of the back of the bar is a thing. And you think, well, it's just some moulded plastic with a little clip and a thing so people... Why doesn't every manufacturer do that? I do not know. But when we built the products I worked with in the early days of Logitech, we went, cable management's going to matter. Because users have this bad habit, again, no one listening to this but others, have this bad habit of going, oh, my phone's a bit low on charge, I need a USB port. I'll just keep unplugging cables out the back of this device until I find one.
I'm scared of this system, I just want the HDMI, yank.
Yeah, or that thing's looking at me, it isn't anymore. Yeah. And you know what they never do? They never repair the room when they leave. So things like MTBF, mean time between failure, things like total cost of ownership, they're the sort of things that I would encourage
And
go and investigate.
And this is where I would say to people in the community, and we talk about this a lot, talk to your peers, talk to like different vendors. Like, people will share these stories, and like, we've all been through these stories. That I find that's some of the best ways. I love it. We do some in-person user groups in London. It's amazing hearing some really big organisations sharing with each other. Like, oh yeah, we tried that too. Yep, we found the same thing. It's like you can save yourself a hell of a lot of time by just talking to your peers about experience.
You can. I started a group which I know that you know of, Tom, and I know the work you do is great in user communities. I've always been a big fan. I actually started a group back in 1999 called the AV User Group in London, where I got half a dozen of the biggest
still going strong
video
now.
conferencing users. And I have nothing to do with it. It's a great group, but I moved on from it. But they've flourished, that group, and the primary reason is because they can sit there and talk to each other and go, yeah, but what's it really like? And I'm not suggesting salespeople would lie to customers, because that wouldn't happen. But they simply don't have the experience.
Yeah, they might not know the negatives. That's what you're saying.
We'll go with that. Yes.
Awesome. So, Simon, we could talk for ages. I'm going to have you back again, but I really appreciate the point of view, particularly now you're free in consulting. For anybody who wants to talk to you more about either choices from a customer point of view, or probably more likely from a vendor point of view, positioning and portfolio, how can they get a hold of you?
Simon at Accession Events, which is EXCESSIONS events.com is the best way of getting me. I'm sure we'll have some links at the bottom of this.
Share all the links.
I'm fairly active on the LinkedIn and other locations as well. And in fact, I will say I hadn't really considered this before our conversation. I have thought that my primary opportunity to help people is at the vendor level, right? I have a bar, or anything else. It doesn't have to be a video conferencing device. It could be a tractor. How do I differentiate myself from my competition, which isn't about adding another HDMI lead on the back, right? So that's one part of what I do. I think resellers also don't really know how to differentiate themselves from their competition.
Yeah, there's a whole other pod there.
There is, but that's something that if anyone's interested in talking about it, I'd be delighted to swap notes on that one. And then from an end user perspective, if someone is out there and they're like, I don't know how to even begin to pick which vendors I even stick on my short list. If people want to chat with me about it, I'd be delighted. You know what? It's interesting information for me. I've got a wealth of it. If people want to go and give me a call, feel free. Find me on LinkedIn. Find me on the bottom of this. Ask Tom. He's got my home address.
Happy to make the intro, and I think it would be high value to any of those groups of people to suck up your wealth of experience in the space. And it's definitely an interesting time for this space. I think it's going to get more and more competitive.
Yeah, I agree. In a world where all the products are good enough, now how are you going to differentiate yourself from the competitors? That goes way beyond products is a very interesting topic. And I feel I'm in that point in my career. I know I look 42, but I'm 57 now. I want to spend the rest of my time in this world, in this industry at least, looking at how to compete more effectively. It's so much more interesting than, we've got another camera angle, or there's 57,000 different types of streaming, or I can put people in different size boxes. It's like, shoot me now. Let's actually talk about something that customers actually care about. Much more interesting.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining us, Simon. Appreciate it.
Oh, you bet, Tom. It's always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you for having me on. And I'm looking forward to any feedback we might get on this.
Thanks a lot.